Hi. In this video I will cover several criticisms that Matthew Matosis brought up in his Dark Souls 2 critique that were addressed in the improved Scholar of the First Sin version. I'm not agreeing with every critique in his video.
The mace-wielding knights in the dragon area are perhaps the worst enemies in the entire series, thanks to how stupidly unfair their moveset is.
But as someone that prefers the Scholar version, the critiques that I will cover in this video are ones that I agree with.
It's not just bosses that suffer from the mentality that more enemies somehow makes the gameplay better. The regular enemy placements fall into this trap as well. There's far more groups in Dark Souls 2 which automatically aggro together in clumps, forcing the player to fight against 2 or 3 difficult enemies at a time.
This room is already a good way to highlight the different enemy encounter design philosophy between the two versions. In Scholar, these Scion Knights are all passive until you approach them, and you could just walk past them if you do not want to fight them. You can also get a lot of damage in before the statues wake up. In the worst case you will fight 2 at the same time if you greedily run towards the item. This is a general theme throughout Scholar. You can prevent getting ganked by playing cautiously, while Vanilla just ganked you by default. In Vanilla, 2 of them will automatically aggro, and if you bait them outside there are several archers shooting at you. The trap room right before also shows a drastic difference in the approach to fairness. In Vanilla, they just shot at you when you entered the room, so you would most likely get poisoned as there was no warning. In Scholar, they shoot past you when you open the chest. The game teaches you that these masks are dangerous. The different approach to enemy encounters is already apparent starting from the very first area. There is immediately a group of hollows sprinting at you, with an archer to back them up. The same happens again when you climb up the ladder. In Scholar, there is already a noticeable lack of enemy spam as you can fight them all 1 versus 1. The archer has a much shorter aggro range as well. When you climb up the ladder you will only get ganked if you greedily grab all the items without paying any attention to the sleeping hollows waking up as soon as you get close to them. The Scholar version gives the player control over how many enemies they want to aggro at the same time. We can see this design philosophy throughout the game with many instances where Vanilla just threw hordes of enemies at the players, but Scholar gives them much more control and ways to handle these encounters smarter. Another good example is this encounter in No Man's Wharf. In Vanilla you will always aggro 3 pirates and a dog no matter how slow you try to approach them. In Scholar, they are spread apart and allow you to fight them in smaller groups. Throughout this video I will show more examples of enemy encounters that got improved by reducing the amount of enemies that attack you at the same time.
Dark Souls 2 just haphazardly places massive enemies all over the place. Dealing with multiple strong enemies like this comes across as a hassle rather than an interesting fight, which encourages players to use cheap tactics instead of playing fair.
This encounter also got improved a bit, as they were right next to the archers in Vanilla, but got moved away from them in Scholar, which makes it just a little bit less annoying.
As a melee character, you can pull back until the enemies start walking back to their starting point, leaving only one of them to deal with. And as a ranged character, you can stand back and abuse the AI's inability to move into certain areas. This gets taken to ridiculous heights later in the game. If you ask me, King Vendrick should have just defended his kingdom by building more doorways.
The whole dragon shrine got massively nerfed in the Scholar version. In Vanilla there was a mage that could shoot at you during the first 3 encounters. His spell had the really annoying effect of throwing you to the ground.
The mace-wielding knights in the dragon area are perhaps the worst enemies in the entire series, thanks to how stupidly unfair their moveset is. They seem to just reset their animations constantly without any kind of stamina. Even after dropping their mace on the ground, they have no recovery time before they're swinging all over the place again. Trivial for a magic-wielding character, but insanely unfair for melee characters since there's no safe time to attack them.
There were several encounters with multiple strong Drake Keepers attacking you at the same time. I never managed to beat this area without heavily relying on cheesing enemies, as it really feels like they never play-tested it, so I agree with him that it heavily encouraged you to abuse their AI. I was lucky not to accidentally aggro him while fighting the other one. This encounter with 2 shield Drake Keepers is just way too much, as one of them alone is already hard enough to fight. In Scholar, it is just a series of 1 versus 1 fights. After you defeat their leader, you permanently earn the respect and can just run through for subsequent attempts at the boss. The hardest encounter is a single shield Drake Keeper in the basement. In my opinion, this is one of the hardest enemies in the series, as he has fast attacks, long combos, a shield, and extremely high poise damage. Vanilla letting you fight against 2 of them is an insane challenge without cheesing.
Look at this path to Velstalt in Dark Souls 2. It's a single corridor littered with no less than 7 heavily armoured enemies. There's no sense of progress slowly making your way down a corridor by fighting the same enemy 7 times.
Like many other areas, this corridor had more enemy spam and less enemy variety in vanilla. I'm fighting against 3 here, but that's because I'm sloppy. But at a minimum, there are multiple times where you have to fight 2 of them simultaneously. In Scholar, it's just a single fight against 2 Cyan Knights, and then a non-respawning Dragon Rider mini-boss. It's like they listened to him, because now you do actually have a sense of progress. Kind of off topic, but I also feel like this is the good kind of boss reuse, because you are again fighting against a tutorial boss who is now more like a regular enemy, which is reminiscent of the Taurus and Capra demons in DS1. To me, this is just a good way to show how much you have progressed in this game. This area also feels emptier in vanilla. There are a few more chests here in Scholar that just add a little bit more flair to this area, even if their contents are not all that interesting. But something that feels interesting to discover are all the hidden enemies that have been added throughout the game. Something that got worse in the Scholar version are the bell-ringing hollows that wake up these ghostly spellcasters. In vanilla, it was just this single one. But in Scholar, they trolled the player a bit more by increasing the number to 3.
So you're far more likely to just run through it.
In vanilla, the 2 Cyan Knights that are camping at the fog wall make it hard to just run through, so trying to run back to the boss often leads to situations like in this clip, but often even worse. In Scholar, it is trivially easy to get through the fog wall, which just makes subsequent runbacks way less frustrating.
Same goes for the hallway leading up to the Looking Glass Knight. There's no point putting a bonfire next to a single hallway with enemies most players are simply going to run past. They might as well have just placed the fog door there and saved everyone the hassle.
This is once again an area that is less of a hassle in the Scholar version. In vanilla, there was again a Cyan Knight directly at the fog wall. It was also harder to spot that the horses wake up, so he would work as bait to get you ambushed. Like seriously, I was walking slowly and there are only very few frames where you can see the eyes turning red. In Scholar, this ambush is a lot better indicated, as all of them except for the first one wake up a bit earlier. So the first time you walk through, you can see it coming and prevent getting attacked by all of them at the same time. The run back to the Looking Glass Knight is also easier. So it is less of a trap for new players in the Scholar version, but it is also harder to break them in their petrified state, so if you fight your way through at a minimum you will have to fight two at the same time. In Vanilla, it is possible to defeat all of them without having any of them wake up. But if it goes wrong, you will have to fight against two horses and a Cyan Knight, so overall, this corridor became a little bit better in the Scholar version.
If you die to the Lost Sinner, then decide to take a break when the loading screen comes up, you'll be killed by the archers at the bonfire over and over again, losing all your souls in the process.
He is right that this is indeed pretty annoying, but luckily this no longer happens in the Scholar version. During my first playthrough I died to the Lost Sinner and went to get something to drink. When I came back I had already died several times, and it just felt pretty bad. These were probably the first enemies that I deliberately despawned. In Scholar, they removed most of the archers here to prevent this from happening.
Just across the bridge from there, they also made the genius decision to place an important vendor in a room with 5 exploding enemies.
Yeah, this was pretty annoying as well, and these were probably the second enemies I deliberately despawned. In this clip I've used an alluring skull to lure them all together, but as a new player you might just get thrown to the ground repeatedly. In Scholar, they are all standing around passively, so shopping at Straight is a lot more relaxed, and farming them for alluring skulls is a lot easier.
Rather than make the Freya fight difficult by giving her a challenging moveset, the designers just dropped some random spiders into the battle instead.
I disagree that the spiders are random, as thematically they feel like the babies of the boss, but this is yet another good example of the improvements to enemy encounter design in the Scholar edition. In Vanilla, this was just a gank boss fight. But in Scholar you are presented with the interesting choice of either dealing with the small spiders, or using the torch to keep them at a distance. Not only does this make the torch feel like a more useful tool, but it also makes this whole area a lot less painful to explore. This also makes this spider gank trap chest feel much less unfair. In Vanilla, there was barely any indication of danger, and you had to deal with the spiders. In Vanilla it felt more like an unfair ambush, but in Scholar it's well telegraphed. But it was also more likely that you already had the torch out in this dark cave, as the torch is generally more important in Scholar, which means that you would not even get attacked. Not even getting attacked leads me to another instance of a well-improved enemy encounter. In Vanilla, there were already these moaning face trees in the shaded woods, but they did not have any important role. This area was not well received, due to the low visibility and invisible enemies. But in Scholar it is once again a lot more interesting and fair, as you can distract the enemies by hitting these trees. By the way, these knights are visible to me, as I got the Eye of the Priestess from the Ilium Lois DLC, but that also only works in the Scholar version. Now it is possible to explore this area without having to constantly worry, and discovering this hidden mechanic just feels rewarding.
The level design in Dark Souls 2 is not only lazy because it provides an incoherent world compared to Dark Souls 1, but also because it has less interesting layouts than the levels in either of the previous games. Many of the areas look interesting and large from the outside, only to be totally underwhelming when you actually go through them. The Tower of Flame is a small path with one short divergence leading to an optional boss.
I disagree with his downplaying of how interesting Heide's Tower of Flame feels. To me, the honorful duel mechanics here just add a lot of mystique to the mysterious old knights. These enemies feel great to fight against, and their AI is pretty unique in the Souls series as they allow you to engage in 1 versus 1 duels. They just stand back and watch you fight their friends. So yes, the map layout itself is not as interesting, but they prioritized creative enemy encounters instead, which is a lot of fun in my opinion. In case someone is wondering why the second one did not attack me, this only happens if you disrespect the duel. If you stand your ground and fight, the second one will respect that and back off, but if you run away they will both chase you across the map. But in Scholar, Heide's Tower now feels even more interesting as it is now like 2 areas in one. There are now Heide Knights spread around the area, and most of them just sit around passively until you defeat the Dragon Rider. Not only does it add more enemy variety, it also makes it easier to farm the Heide Knight armor. This mechanic just adds a lot more depth to this small area, and it no longer feels as unfinished and empty as it did in vanilla. I'm also a huge fan of respawning Heide Knights, and I enjoy just coming back here to fight them. In vanilla I never felt the need to come back here, but in Scholar it's just a really interesting challenge.
Dark Souls 2 attempts to make a major change of its own when it comes to light sources, and fails at this as well. I played Dark Souls 2 on the lowest darkness settings available, but none of the areas were ever as dark as the Tomb of the Giants in Dark Souls 1.
This is another issue that has been addressed in the Scholar version. On the left you see Vanilla and on the right Scholar, both at the lowest darkness setting. A lot more areas encourage the usage of the torch now, as many of them are a lot darker. In general, there are a lot more uses for the torch now, but I'm not going to spoil them all. To me, the whole game also looks better with these improvements to the lighting. I prefer the new look in general, even bright areas look better to me. Combined with the fact that there are less empty rooms now, the game just feels much more alive and atmospheric. Not only is there more decoration throughout the game, there are also a lot more explosive barrels that you can utilize, by either shooting them with fire or baiting enemies into attacking them. In vanilla, this part contains fewer explosive barrels, but instead there are more dogs here. Scholar lets you shoot these explosive barrels from outside, but in vanilla they were placed in just a slightly worse position where you could not shoot them. In Scholar, there is yet another new explosive barrel that you can use to deal with the 3 to the left. In vanilla, there were just less opportunities for observant players to overcome challenges by using the environment. I kinda lost track here, but both lighting and background decoration are part of the art direction, and Scholar just has a much better feel to it.
In Dark Souls 2, Majula only opens into 2 locations at the beginning, but the sad thing is it actually connects to 5. The Grave of Saints, Huntsman's Copse and Shaded Woods are all sealed off until the player completes at least some of the other areas, or gathers up around 12,000 souls to buy the cat ring.
It's probably still not enough player freedom for him, but in Scholar you can access Shaded Woods much earlier than in Vanilla, where the first fragrant branch a new player discovers is probably the one that is rewarded by defeating the Lost Sinner, so after completing at least one area. It could take several hours before you gain access to Shaded Woods. The next 2 were all the way up in Earthen Peak, or all the way down in Black Gulch. In Scholar, the first branch you discover is the one you can buy from Melentia, but then you find yet another one after defeating the Pursuer. There is yet another early one in No Man's Wharf. So it is now possible that new players will access Shaded Woods a lot earlier than they would have in Vanilla, which means that they also gain earlier access to pyromancies and good equipment. By the way, by using the tree trick I showed earlier you can grab this ring without having to worry about any enemies.
This has an adverse effect on multiple playthroughs of the game since they all start out the same way. The layout of Demon Souls, and to a lesser extent Dark Souls 1, allowed you to start a new game and quickly build whatever character you liked. Instead of carrying on this tradition, Dark Souls 2 railroads the player at the beginning and only opens up more later on. There's a serious lack of useful equipment in the first half of the game, which becomes doubly problematic since players are going to waste Titanite and souls on weapons they're not very attached to, simply because they don't have any other options.
Yeah, I disagree with that statement a lot, as I feel like there is plenty of good equipment early on in the game, and upgrade materials are not as limited as they used to be in the previous games. Combined with the lower cost of leveling, it just feels so much faster to me to get your build started. The halberd you discover on the gank sword is a pretty good dex weapon. The Drangleic set along with the Drangleic sword is pretty strong, but requires a bit of a stat investment. By the way, did you know why the helmet is missing? Here is why.
Take these. I think you may just need them.
The Bastard Sword is also a reliable weapon. In Scholar, it is on the roof, where there are again new explosive barrels that make it easier to deal with the ironclad soldiers. But then there is also the Greatsword, which can be accessed very early in the game, and is one of the best and most popular weapons. A weapon that is a bit harder to discover, but still accessible early in the game, is the Craftsman's Hammer. And if you are playing Scholar, you will also already have access to Macduff. Scholar also turned the Grand Lance into an early weapon. It is fun to use, and strong. Combined with the earlier access to Shaded Woods, there is simply a bit more good equipment available early in the game.
The ember needed to ascend weapons is tucked all the way away in Iron Keep, which means at the very least going through the Tower of Flame, Huntsman's Copse, Harvest Valley and Earthen Peak just to snag the ember.
In Scholar, you just have to go through the Forest of Fallen Giants, so in most cases you will already have the ember when you encounter Macduff.
Never mind the other materials you might want for your weapon. The majority of Twinkling Titanite needed for special upgrades is only available once the player gets to Drangleic Castle, at which point they're most of the way through the game anyway.
I disagree with the idea that it is somehow bad that the upgrade materials for special weapons are limited until the beginning of the late game. But when he played the game, the DLCs were not even out yet, so the version he played had a lot less post-castle content. Additionally, Scholar also increased the amount of Twinkling Titanite you can get early, which I will show in more detail, right after I flexed a bit with my Fume Knight skills. Before you reach the castle, there are 6 Twinkling Titanite that are the same in both versions. And they are all kind of hidden, so it is easy to miss them, but it also feels very rewarding to discover them by exploring thoroughly. There are 2 that are exclusive to vanilla. One drops from the rolling flexile sentry that has been randomly placed here. Then there is also this one in the gutter. In Scholar, they played a trick on people that were expecting the Titanite here. But Scholar also gets 5 additional drops from the various Pursuer encounters, except for the one in Iron Keep. You can also gain a few more through crow trades.
Yeah, silky smooth.
So, before reaching the castle, you can upgrade your special weapon to +4 in Scholar, but in Vanilla only to +3. This feels like a good balance to me. Assuming that you are exploring everything, then you should have your first fully upgraded regular weapon when reaching Iron Keep. After Shrine of Amana, you should have your first fully upgraded special weapon. And after the Dragon Shrine, you should have your first fully upgraded boss weapon. Then you have your build ready for the DLCs. In my opinion, this is a good weapon upgrade progression that feels better than it did in Vanilla. Matthew Mathosis played it without DLC, and that also makes a big difference for the late game and NG Plus preparation, as they added a lot of new drops, so it's easier now to upgrade several weapons without having to farm.
Soul memory is a decent idea, but executed incredibly poorly, making it worse than the simplistic level matching the previous games did. I like that they were at least trying to think of ways to stop twink characters from obliterating new players, but in doing so they made invasions even more rare, and now players can't do novelty builds just to play in certain areas because their soul memory will eventually get too high.
With the release of the Scholar Edition, they also patched the Agape ring into the vanilla version. This ring is not the best solution, but at least the problem of the soul memory getting too high can now be prevented at the cost of a ring slot.
Worst offender of all is probably the Windmill in Earthen Peak, which needs to be burned down in order to clear the boss room of poison. I have no idea how anyone is supposed to discover this without being told to do it by reading notes left by other players.
In the Scholar version, they added a new NPC here that helps players discover the secret. They also placed an enemy here that guards it and only aggroes once you get really close, which also makes it more obvious that it is important. She really insists that you should check this out. Sure, It is still not obvious that you are supposed to pull out the torch, and they could have improved this by putting a sconce here where you can light it. She is fun.
There's no equivalence in Dark Souls 2 apart from the giant memories, which are extremely brief and come right at the end of the story. This game could have easily just taken place very far away from Lordran and had nothing to do with linking the fire or the undead curse. All the team had to do was get a bit more creative. Alternatively, they could have just not linked it to Dark Souls 1 at all. I mean, who's to say the Dark Souls games need to take place in the same world? Of course, all this means they ended up retreading the lore of the first game as well as the story.
One drowned in poison, another succumbed to flame. Still another slumbers in the realm of ice.
Since the release of the DLCs and the addition of the Aldea storyline with the release of the Scholar version, the story of DS2 has managed to find a creative identity of its own. DS2 explores how various kingdoms were affected by the curse, and how they tried to cope with it. DS1 was more of a classical hero's journey, but DS2 feels more like an exploration of the effects of the curse on a more personal level. Due to the curse, Lucatial suffers from memory loss and fears that she will even forget herself. The old Iron King tried to deal with the curse by relentlessly hunting down the undead. Vendrick dealt with it by locking away the Throne of Want in himself to give his brother more time for his research by preventing Nashandra from accessing it. Aldea was looking for a way to break the cycle. Instead of prolonging the Age of Fire or letting the flame fade for an Age of Dark, he tried to figure out how humanity could get rid of the curse. After we collect all the crowns from the other monarchs, we become immune to the curse, which means that we can continue Aldea's research without going hollow. Instead of choosing between light and dark, we try to find our own path.
One day fire will fade, and dark will become a curse. Men will be free from death, left to wander eternally. Dark will again be ours, and in our true shape, we can bury the false legends of yore. Only, is this our only choice? Seeker of fire, coveter of the throne. Seek strength.
But the question remains, would you tell me? Light, dark, or something else entirely?